A calm, peaceful human colony lay nestled on a far-off planet, far from the bustling, chaotic heart of Earth. It was the kind of place where families could live without the worry of constant war, surrounded by natural beauty and quiet skies. Children played under the shade of towering trees, while parents worked in harmony with the land. Life was simple. For those who lived there, it was home. The kind of home they thought they could protect. But that peaceful existence was shattered in an instant. Without warning, the sky darkened. An unnatural silence fell, broken only by the hum of approaching ships. The first sign of danger came too late, too suddenly. Without any prior indication, massive warships from the Galactic Council descended from the heavens, their immense forms blotting out the sun. These ships were unlike anything the humans had ever seen, sleek, deadly, and cold as the vacuum of space itself. They moved with a terrifying precision, their weapons primed and ready to destroy. The people of the colony barely had time to react. The Galactic Council's forces wasted no time. Their ships unleashed devastating blasts, tearing through the atmosphere and striking the ground with explosive force. Buildings crumbled in seconds, fires erupted, and the once peaceful streets turned into a war zone. The inhabitants of the colony, innocent civilians, had no defenses, no weapons, nothing that could withstand the power of the Council's advanced technology. Amid the chaos, a small figure ran through the streets. It was a child, no more than 8 years old, with wide eyes filled with terror. She ran towards her parents, a cry of panic escaping her lips. The child was the daughter of Commander Bonner, one of the leaders of the human defense forces stationed at the colony. She had always been safe, protected by her father's reputation and strength. But no one was safe today. As the child reached the entrance to the family home, a sudden explosion ripped through the ground nearby, sending debris flying. The blast sent the little girl crashing to the ground, her body tossed and battered like a rag doll. Her cries echoed through the air as her parents, helpless and desperate, rushed to her side. But it was too late. The child, caught in the explosion, lay in the dust, gravely wounded. In that moment, everything changed. The pain and anger from the child's suffering spread like wildfire across the colony, sparking a fury that could not be quenched. Commander Bonner, witnessing the destruction of his home and the injury of his only daughter, felt his heart break. His blood boiled with rage. This wasn't just an attack on a colony, this was an attack on his family, his people, and everything they stood for. Standing over his daughter's crumpled body, Commander Bonner could barely contain the rage that burned within him. His face twisted with a mixture of grief and fury. He looked to the parents of the child, who had just lost their own, their faces pale and filled with despair. With tears welling up in his eyes, Bonner made a vow, one he would keep with every ounce of his being. He clenched his fists, his voice shaking with emotion as he spoke, "No one hurts one of ours in lives." Far above them, on the flagship of the Galactic Council, the alien commander overseeing the attack stood in a command room, a smug grin on his face. The Galactic Council's victory was already in the bag. He had received word that the colony had been wiped out with ease. His forces were superior, his enemies, nothing more than ants beneath his boot. He sneered at the idea that such a primitive species could ever rise to challenge the might of the Galactic Council. "Let them fight," the alien commander muttered to himself. "They will be crushed like all the others." He turned to his officers, his eyes cold and dismissive. "Humanity is weak. They will bow before us or perish." He had no idea just how wrong he was. The smugness on the commander's face would soon disappear. The Council's forces may have been technologically advanced, but they had made one fatal mistake, underestimating the humans they had just attacked. Humanity might have been outclassed in technology, but they were far from weak. The human spirit, the desire for revenge and justice, was stronger than any weapon or fleet. And now, that spirit would rise, sparked by the flames of anger and the deep need for retribution. Back on the surface of the colony, Commander Bonner wasn't the only one feeling this fire. The soldiers, once scattered and frightened, were now rallying under his leadership. The message was clear: this was not a day for survival. This was a day for vengeance. They would make the Galactic Council regret ever laying a finger on Earth, let alone hurting one of their own. In the midst of the destruction, Commander Bonner quickly organized his forces. He knew they were severely outnumbered, that their weaponry was no match for the overwhelming power of the Galactic Council's warships. But he had something the Council could never understand: the drive to protect his people, to fight for those he loved, even if it meant fighting an enemy who seemed unstoppable. As Bonner rallied his soldiers, a countdown began in the heart of the colony's command center. The pressure mounted. Every second brought the humans closer to making their next move, a move that could either seal their fate or start a war that would change the galaxy forever. The humans knew they were underdogs. They knew that the Galactic Council's forces could wipe them out in an instant. But something inside them refused to accept defeat. Bonner's words echoed in their minds, filling them with a newfound strength. No one hurts one of ours and lives. The Galactic Council's forces hovered above, and their mighty warships cast long shadows over the battlefield. From their ships, they looked down on the humans, so small, so fragile. They had no idea what they had just set in motion. As the camera panned across the battlefield, the tension was almost unbearable. The sounds of distant explosions filled the air, while the sky above was streaked with the dark silhouettes of the Council's ships. The countdown ticked on. The humans had no choice but to act, and they had to act fast. Every minute that passed only made the Council's victory seem more inevitable. But despite the odds, the humans weren't ready to give up. They had tasted the pain of loss, and they were ready to make the Council pay. The fate of the colony, and perhaps the fate of Earth itself, was now in the hands of Commander Bonner and his soldiers. Would they rise to the occasion? Could they turn the tide against an enemy so much stronger? In that moment, the suspense reached its peak. The countdown hit 0. And that's when the storm broke. The first wave of human retaliation began with a series of small, coordinated strikes. The soldiers launched into battle with everything they had, fighting back with all the ferocity they could muster. It was no longer about defending a colony, it was about exacting revenge, about making the Galactic Council pay for what they had done. The camera zoomed in on Bonner's face, showing the determination in his eyes. As the first of the beasts were unleashed and human warships launched into space, humanity was no longer just defending itself. It was fighting for its right to survive. The Galactic Council had just ignited a firestorm. And they had no idea what was coming. The sound of war echoed through the human colony, and it was the beginning of something much bigger than anyone had anticipated. Commander Bonner, his face hard with grief and determination, knew the situation was grim. His people were battered, their homes destroyed, and their forces were no match for the advanced weaponry of the Galactic Council. But the greatest loss wasn't just the attack on the colony, it was the injury of his daughter. The pain from her suffering had ignited a fire within Bonner and his soldiers, but now, they needed a plan. A real plan to fight back against the immense power of the Galactic Council and avenge the innocent lives lost. In the heart of the human resistance, a secret meeting was called. Bonner and the other leaders of the Human Alliance gathered in a hidden underground bunker. The walls were lined with high-tech equipment, and the air was thick with tension. They knew they were outmatched, underprepared, and facing enemies who were light years ahead in terms of technology. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, there was something that gave Bonner hope: their secret weapon. The Alliance's plan was risky, but it was the only option left. Earth had been holding back an incredible asset for years: genetically modified war creatures known as the Beasts. These terrifying creatures were designed to turn the tide of battle when the odds were stacked against humanity. They were enormous, fast, and capable of causing destruction on an unimaginable scale. The Beasts had been kept hidden in highly classified facilities, kept dormant until the moment came when humanity had no other choice but to unleash them. That moment had come. Bonner stood before the gathered leaders, his voice steady but filled with a sense of urgency. "We have no choice," he said. "The Council thinks they can wipe us out, but they've underestimated us. These beasts are our only hope to level the playing field. We must send them into battle, now." The room fell silent. The decision was monumental. These beasts were designed for one thing, to wage war. And their mere existence was enough to strike fear into anyone who knew what they were capable of. The technology and science behind the beasts were beyond anything humanity had ever known. But they had been kept secret for years, a last-ditch weapon only to be used in a moment of absolute desperation. One of the leaders spoke up, her voice hesitant but firm. "But Commander, unleashing the beasts could have consequences we cannot predict. We've never tested them in full-scale combat. They're dangerous, even to us." Bonner turned to face her, his expression unwavering. "We are facing an enemy that has shown us no mercy. If we do not fight back, we will be wiped out, and humanity's legacy will be nothing but ashes. The beasts are our last chance." A heavy silence settled over the room. Bonner's words were clear, this was the only path forward. The beasts were the last hope for humanity's survival. And so, after a moment of tense deliberation, the decision was made. The beasts would be released. The scene shifted to a highly classified military facility hidden deep underground. It was a place so secret that few outside the highest ranks of the human alliance knew it even existed. Here, the beasts had been carefully raised and trained in captivity, each one unique, terrifying, and capable of unspeakable destruction. The facility hummed with power as machines came to life, and the walls shook as massive chambers opened to reveal the creatures within. As the containment cells opened, the beasts began to stir. Their massive bodies stretched, their muscles rippling with power. Each one was a monstrosity, with fangs, claws, and bodies armored in thick, impenetrable scales. Their eyes glowed with a primal fury, a reflection of the rage humanity now felt after the attack on their home. The beasts were not mere animals, they were living weapons, bred to be the ultimate soldiers in humanity's fight for survival. Bonner watched from the control room, his heart pounding in his chest. He had seen the beasts in training, but this was different. This was real. The stakes were higher than ever before, and once these creatures were unleashed, there was no going back. It was no longer just about protecting a colony, it was about the survival of humanity itself. The tension in the air was palpable. The moment had arrived. Bonner stepped forward, his voice resolute. "Let them loose." At his command, the doors to the containment chambers opened fully, and the beasts were released into the world. Their roars echoed through the facility, shaking the very foundation of the bunker. The ground beneath Bonner's feet trembled as the creatures began their march toward the surface. They were ready. And humanity's last hope for victory had been unleashed. Outside, the battle was raging. The Galactic Council's ships hovered above, their firepower unrivaled. But the beasts were unlike anything the Council had ever faced. As they emerged from the depths of the military facility, their colossal forms towered over everything in their path. Their massive claws dug into the earth, leaving deep gashes as they surged forward with terrifying speed. They were unstoppable forces of nature, each one a living nightmare. Bonner and his soldiers, already preparing for their own assault, watched in awe as the beasts stormed the battlefield. The first wave of Council forces had no idea what was coming. The beasts moved with an eerie precision, tearing through the ranks of the Galactic Council's soldiers and war machines as though they were nothing more than paper. Their fury was unmatched. They were the embodiment of humanity's anger, revenge, and desperation. In the heart of the battle, Bonner's soldiers fought alongside the beasts, their weapons now working in tandem with the monstrous creatures. The once hopeless situation had shifted. The Council's forces, so confident in their technological superiority, were now being overrun by the sheer power and unpredictability of the beasts. Each massive strike sent shockwaves through the battlefield, and the Council's forces began to falter. But despite the chaos and destruction, Bonner couldn't shake the memory of his daughter. Her pain, her injury, it fueled every move he made. It was more than just a fight for survival now. It was a fight for justice. The beasts were powerful, but it was Bonner's unwavering resolve that drove them forward. The memory of his daughter's cries pushed him into battle, making him fight harder, faster, and with a purpose greater than any weapon could provide. As the beasts tore through the enemy lines, the tides of war began to turn. The Galactic Council's forces, so sure of their victory, found themselves in retreat. The human warriors, fighting alongside their genetically engineered beasts, pressed forward with unrelenting force. And in that moment, the humans realized something: they weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for revenge. For the justice of their people. For the future of humanity. The beasts were no longer just weapons. They were symbols of humanity's refusal to be broken, no matter the odds. And now, as the Galactic Council's forces scrambled to regain control, the humans had found their power, through fury, through sacrifice, and through the unleashing of their darkest, most dangerous weapon. The beasts were their last hope, but with them came the strength to turn the tide of the war. With each passing moment, humanity's resolve grew stronger. The fight had only just begun, and the outcome was far from certain. But with the beasts at their side, the humans knew one thing for sure: they would not go down without a fight. And the Galactic Council would soon learn the true meaning of underestimating the strength of humanity. The night sky was torn apart as humanity's warships launched into the vastness of space, their engines blazing in the darkness. The ships were small, in comparison to the massive fleets of the Galactic Council, but they were not without their strength. The human ships fired in coordinated, synchronized strikes, each burst of energy from their weapons a symbol of humanity's defiance. Their numbers were few, but their will was strong. The space battle began as the Galactic Council's powerful ships descended upon Earth, confident in their overwhelming firepower. However, they had underestimated humanity's resolve, and their secret weapon. On the ground, chaos erupted. The beasts had been unleashed, and the Galactic Council's soldiers found themselves facing an unimaginable threat. These were no ordinary creatures. They were engineered for war, designed to be humanity's ultimate weapon, and they were now charging onto the battlefield with terrifying force. Humanoid in shape but far more monstrous in appearance, these beasts had metallic exoskeletons that gleamed under the harsh light of the battlefield. Their armored claws were capable of tearing through steel, and their immense strength made them nearly unstoppable. The first wave of beasts hit the enemy lines with brutal force. Their massive paws crushed alien soldiers beneath them, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. The Galactic Council's highly advanced technology, designed to conquer entire planets, seemed almost useless against the sheer might of these creatures. The planet's surface quaked beneath the power of the beasts as they rampaged across the terrain, their claws rending through enemy defenses like paper. Every step they took seemed to shake the Earth itself. In the sky, human warships launched attack after attack, making use of their small size to slip through the Council's defenses. They were no match for the massive enemy ships, but their strategy was different: they attacked with precision. As the ships soared through the dark vacuum of space, their weapons fired in perfect unison, creating a deadly web of energy that cut through the enemy's formations. Their tactics were unconventional, but they were working. The Galactic Council's forces were thrown into disarray, unable to comprehend the unexpected nature of humanity's assault. The once proud fleet of the Council was now under attack by a force they never anticipated, a determined human spirit, bolstered by the power of the beasts. On the ground, the scene was nothing short of apocalyptic. The beasts continued their rampage, their terrifying roars shaking the battlefield. Alien soldiers who once believed themselves to be invincible were now running for their lives, helpless in the face of the beasts' fury. Each beast seemed to possess a unique ability, from smashing through enemy tanks with its massive claws to unleashing devastating blasts from its armored back. The Council's defenses buckled under the onslaught, their shields shattered by the immense power of these creatures. In the middle of this chaos stood Commander Bonner, now clad in an advanced combat suit designed for the battlefield. The suit, a high-tech marvel of human engineering, enhanced his strength and agility, allowing him to fight alongside the beasts in ways no human soldier ever could. Bonner's face was set in grim determination as he surveyed the battlefield. His soldiers were fighting with all their might, but it was the beasts who were truly turning the tide. With a rallying cry, Bonner signaled his squad to mount the beasts. The soldiers, armed with futuristic weapons, rode the beasts into the heart of the Galactic Council's strongholds. It was a sight of pure chaos, a line of humans charging alongside the monstrous creatures, tearing through the enemy ranks. The beasts swiped at anything in their path, their claws ripping through alien armor, while Bonner and his soldiers fired their weapons, picking off any remaining council troops who dared to stand in their way. The battle was fast, brutal, and unforgiving. The humans fought with everything they had, driven by a singular purpose: revenge. The beasts, their strength unmatched, provided the perfect cover, allowing Bonner's soldiers to advance into the very heart of the enemy stronghold. The once feared Galactic Council had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. As the battle raged on, Bonner's heart raced. The adrenaline surged through his veins as he fought side by side with the beasts. The once quiet, peaceful world was now a war zone, with fire and smoke rising from the scorched earth. The sound of explosions filled the air, and the cries of fallen soldiers, both human and alien, echoed across the battlefield. Bonner's mind was focused, but his thoughts were also with his daughter. The images of her pain, her suffering, fueled every move he made. He would make the Galactic Council pay. But the battle was far from over. The Council, though initially taken by surprise, was now regrouping. Their forces were formidable, and they weren't going to give up without a fight. The Galactic Council's remaining soldiers began to counterattack with a ferocity that surprised the humans. The tide of the battle shifted as more Council reinforcements arrived, including powerful war machines and deadly alien soldiers. The beasts, though powerful, were beginning to be overwhelmed. Bonner could see the struggle. His soldiers were fighting valiantly, but the beasts were taking a heavy toll. The combat suits were damaged, and some of the creatures had been wounded in the chaos. But even as the situation grew more desperate, Bonner refused to give up. He knew that the fate of humanity rested on this battle. The Council might have the technology, but humanity had something far more powerful: resilience, unity, and the fury of those who had been wronged. The pace of the battle was relentless. As Bonner and his soldiers continued to fight, the beasts showed no signs of stopping. With every roar, they tore through the enemy's lines, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. The human warships continued their attack, raining down fire from above and striking the Council's fleets with deadly precision. The space battle was still raging, but now it seemed that the humans had the upper hand. The Council's forces were scattered, their once perfect formations now broken and disorganized. Despite the chaos, there was a sense of victory in the air. The humans, though still outnumbered, were beginning to turn the tide. The beasts, having been unleashed upon the battlefield, had created a wave of destruction so powerful that the Galactic Council could not hope to withstand it. For the first time, the Council was beginning to realize what it meant to face the wrath of humanity. As Bonner fought, his eyes locked onto the leader of the Galactic Council's forces, a smug alien commander who had once dismissed humanity as weak and insignificant. The commander's face, usually full of arrogance, now twisted in fear as he watched his forces crumble. Bonner knew that the Council had underestimated humanity. And now, the consequences of that mistake were clear. The beasts, though fierce and deadly, were only a part of the plan. It was the humans, fighting alongside these creatures, that were truly turning the tide. The beasts were humanity's power, but it was the humans' courage that would ultimately lead to victory. As Bonner fought through the enemy lines, his heart burned with the memory of his daughter. The battle would continue, but humanity was no longer the underdog. It was the council who would soon feel the full force of their fury. The war raged on around Commander Bonner, but in his mind, the sounds of battle faded, replaced by memories of a time before the chaos. He remembered the child, the one who had unknowingly sparked this entire conflict. Her laughter had once been a comforting sound, a stark contrast to the death and destruction surrounding him now. Bonner had been a mentor, a protector to her, a steady figure in her young life. He had taught her how to defend herself, how to fight, how to survive. And she had learned quickly, growing into a strong, determined young woman. He had never expected to lose her, not like this. Not in the way the Galactic Council had taken her. Her pain, the image of her lying broken on the battlefield, had ignited something in Bonner's soul. It had awakened a fury that could not be quenched by words alone. The sight of her suffering, her life slipping away because of the merciless forces of the Galactic Council, was something he would never forget. It was a wound that would stay with him forever, a wound that would only heal with vengeance. But for now, vengeance wasn't enough. There were sacrifices to be made. The battle was brutal, and Bonner's forces were growing thinner with each passing hour. The odds were stacked against them, humanity was outnumbered, outgunned, and outclassed technologically. But what the Galactic Council didn't understand was the one thing they could never defeat, the human spirit. As Bonner charged through the chaos of the battlefield, his mind kept returning to the child. He had promised her parents that he would protect her, that he would keep her safe. He had failed. And now, every decision, every move he made, was fueled by that promise. He couldn't let her death be in vain. The war was taking its toll on his soldiers, too. Lieutenant Harris, one of Bonner's closest allies, was with him every step of the way. The two had been through countless battles together, their bond forged in the fires of war. Harris had always been there, always ready to fight, to die, for the cause. But now, the battle was shifting. The Galactic Council's forces had regrouped, and their attacks were more brutal than ever. The human soldiers were running out of time, and there was no guarantee they would make it through. In a moment of desperation, Harris made a choice that would change everything. Seeing a group of civilians trapped in the middle of the battlefield, he made the ultimate sacrifice. Without hesitation, he threw himself into the line of fire, covering the civilians as they fled to safety. A burst of enemy fire struck him, but he didn't flinch. He held the line, allowing others to escape. Bonner, witnessing Harris's sacrifice, was momentarily frozen. The loss hit him harder than he expected. Harris had been more than just a soldier, he had been a brother, a friend. His sacrifice tore through Bonner's heart, leaving a hole that would never fully heal. But in that moment of loss, something stirred inside Bonner. The pain, the grief, it was all too familiar. It was the same pain he felt for the child, the same anger, the same thirst for justice. Harris hadn't died in vain. His sacrifice had given them a chance to continue fighting. The battle didn't stop. It couldn't. The Galactic Council was relentless, and the fight for survival pressed on. But the emotional weight of the loss hung heavy on Bonner's shoulders. He felt it in the pit of his stomach as his soldiers fought on, their resolve unwavering, despite the horrors they faced. The sacrifice of one soldier had spurred them all to keep going, to push forward no matter the cost. The human spirit, though bruised and battered, was far from broken. As the battle wore on, more soldiers fell. Each death, each loss, was a painful reminder of the stakes. It wasn't just about defeating the Galactic Council anymore. It was about justice. The humans weren't fighting for revenge alone. They were fighting for their fallen comrades, for the innocent lives lost, for the child who had been cruelly taken from them. Every death, every sacrifice, made their resolve stronger. Bonner pushed through his own grief, his thoughts focused on the fight. He couldn't afford to break now, not when humanity's future hung in the balance. He led his soldiers with unwavering determination, even as the loss of his friends and comrades weighed on him. His mind flashed to the memory of Harris, of the child, of everything they had lost. But the fire in his heart burned brighter than ever. The humans, despite their losses, were not slowing down. They were fighting with everything they had left, their every action a testament to their unbreakable spirit. The beasts, the creatures that had been unleashed, continued to fight alongside them, tearing through the Galactic Council's forces with relentless fury. But it was the humans, their bonds of friendship and loyalty stronger than any weapon, who were truly making a difference. Bonner's eyes burned with anger as he charged forward, his combat suit enhancing his speed and strength. He fought not just for victory, but for those who had fallen, for those who could no longer fight. His soldiers fought alongside him, their faces etched with determination. They had nothing left to lose. And they would stop at nothing to see the Galactic Council brought to justice. As the battle intensified, Bonner found himself face to face with an enemy commander. The Galactic Council had sent their best to stop him, to end this rebellion once and for all. But Bonner wasn't intimidated. He had lost too much to be afraid now. The time for mercy had passed. The two warriors clashed in a brutal battle, their weapons colliding with sparks. Bonner fought with everything he had, every move calculated, every strike driven by the memory of his fallen comrades. He could hear the sound of Harris's voice in his mind, urging him on. The Galactic Council's commander was strong, but Bonner was stronger, fueled by the memories of those who had sacrificed so much. In the heat of battle, Bonner made his final move. With a swift, decisive strike, he disarmed the commander, sending him to the ground. The fight was over. But the war wasn't. The emotional weight of everything they had been through pressed on Bonner's chest. He had fought for justice, for revenge, and for those who could no longer fight. He had lost so much along the way, but in the end, it was all worth it. The human spirit had triumphed once again. The battle continued, but Bonner's heart had already won. The memory of the child, of Harris, and of every soldier who had given their life, would live on in the fight for humanity's future. The Galactic Council had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated humanity's strength. And now, humanity was fighting back, not just for survival, but for justice. The battle was far from over, but the human forces knew that this would be their final stand. The Galactic Council had come to Earth, and now, with their massive warships cloaked in the vast darkness of space, they were preparing for their ultimate assault. The sky above the Earth darkened as the enemy fleet descended, their sheer size overwhelming. These ships were not just warships, they were the pinnacle of alien technology, and their weapons were enough to obliterate entire cities with a single strike. At the center of it all was the flagship, a monstrous AI-controlled vessel, the heart of the Galactic Council's military might. If they could bring it down, the tide of the war would turn. If they failed, humanity would face extinction. Commander Bonner, alongside his surviving soldiers and the genetically modified beasts that had been unleashed upon the battlefield, knew what had to be done. This was a suicide mission, a last-ditch effort to stop the Council's overwhelming forces and to bring an end to the destruction they had caused. But even as Bonner looked at his soldiers, he saw the same fierce determination in their eyes that had carried them through countless battles. They were prepared to give everything for the future of humanity. The final assault began with a deafening roar as human warships launched into the sky, cutting through the atmosphere with a fury that matched their desperation. Despite their small size compared to the Galactic Council's massive fleets, the humans fought with everything they had, their weapons firing in coordinated, synchronized attacks. They had no hope of defeating the enemy in a conventional battle, but they could still make a stand, a final push to save what was left of Earth. Bonner led the charge, riding alongside the beasts who had become humanity's greatest weapon. These creatures, humanoid with powerful metallic exoskeletons and armored claws, were the perfect weapon to fight back against the Galactic Council's advanced forces. As the beasts rampaged through the battlefield, tearing through enemy lines, the humans followed, their weapons blazing. The destruction was intense, the air thick with smoke and the sound of gunfire. The enemy was reeling, caught off guard by the sudden ferocity of humanity's counterattack. The battle raged on, but Bonner's mission was clear. He had to get to the heart of the enemy's forces, the flagship. The Council's supreme commander, the mastermind behind the destruction of the human colonies, was aboard. Bonner knew that bringing down the flagship would be the key to ending this war. But it wasn't just about the war anymore. It was personal. This was for the child who had died, for all the soldiers who had sacrificed their lives, for the millions of innocent lives lost to the Galactic Council's greed. With the help of his beast companions, Bonner fought his way through the chaos. The sight of orbital bombardments lighting up the sky, enemy warships falling in flames, and the ground shaking with the impact of the beast's devastating attacks was awe-inspiring. Humanity's last stand was a desperate, furious battle, a fight not just for survival, but for justice. The destruction was beyond anything Bonner had ever witnessed, but amidst the chaos, he pressed on, his mind focused on the mission ahead. As they neared the flagship, Bonner's heart raced. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. He could feel the weight of the mission on his shoulders, the responsibility to lead his soldiers, to carry the hopes of humanity with him. His comrades fought beside him, their determination unwavering, but Bonner knew that this final battle would come down to him. The Galactic Council had underestimated humanity before, but now they would learn what it meant to face the wrath of those they had oppressed. Inside the massive flagship, Bonner's team fought their way through enemy soldiers, their path clear but dangerous. The halls of the flagship were cold and sterile, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. The sound of metal clashing and weapons firing echoed in the corridors as Bonner and his team pressed forward. The mission was clear: find the Supreme Commander and stop him, no matter the cost. Bonner knew that this would be a fight like no other. The Supreme Commander was no ordinary soldier. He was the embodiment of the Galactic Council's ruthless power, a being who believed that humanity was nothing more than a nuisance to be crushed. But Bonner wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for justice. He was fighting for the child, for the fallen soldiers, and for every human who had been wronged by the Council. Finally, Bonner and his team reached the command center. The Supreme Commander stood at the center, a tall, imposing figure, his expression cold and calculating. The moment their eyes met, the air seemed to crackle with tension. This was the moment Bonner had been preparing for, the moment when the fate of humanity would be decided. The two warriors faced each other, the final showdown about to begin. The Supreme Commander, confident in his superiority, sneered at Bonner. "You humans are nothing but ants," he said, his voice cold and dismissive. "You think you can stand against the might of the Galactic Council? You are already defeated." Bonner's eyes burned with fury, but there was no fear in him. "You're wrong," he said, his voice steady. "You've underestimated us from the start. And now, you'll pay the price." The battle began. The two combatants clashed in a brutal display of skill and power. The Supreme Commander fought with the precision and strength of a trained soldier, his movements calculated and efficient. But Bonner was driven by something more: rage, grief, and the unbreakable will of humanity. He fought with everything he had, every blow fueled by the memory of those who had fallen, by the child whose suffering had ignited this war. The fight was intense. The Supreme Commander was fast, his combat skills honed to perfection, but Bonner was relentless. Every time the commander struck, Bonner parried with lightning speed, using his advanced combat suit to enhance his strength and agility. The two warriors fought with the intensity of a storm, neither giving an inch. Bonner could feel the weight of every loss on his shoulders, but he refused to give up. He used every skill he had learned in his years of service, his instincts guiding his every move. The Supreme Commander, despite his superior training and strength, was starting to falter. He had underestimated the humans, and now, he was paying the price. With a final, decisive strike, Bonner disarmed the Supreme Commander, sending him crashing to the ground. The fight was over. The Galactic Council's last hope had fallen. Bonner stood over the defeated commander, his heart pounding in his chest. The battle was won, but the war wasn't over. The council still had its forces, but without their leader, their power would crumble. Bonner's mind flashed to the child, to Harris, to all the soldiers who had given their lives. This victory wasn't just for him, it was for them. For humanity. The Galactic Council had made a fatal mistake, and now they would pay the price. As the flagship began to fall apart, Bonner knew that humanity's future was uncertain, but they had taken their first step toward victory. The battle had been won, but the fight for the future was far from over. Humanity had proven that they would never be crushed, never be silenced. And now, the Galactic Council would learn what it meant to face the wrath of humanity. The final moments of the battle were a blur of smoke, fire, and the echoes of combat. The Galactic Council's once mighty fleet, their ships towering over the human warships like giants, had been reduced to burning wreckage. The flagship, the heart of the Council's power, was no more, its massive hull crumbling in the vacuum of space. Its destruction was the final blow to the Council's reign, signaling the beginning of their downfall. With the death of the Supreme Commander, the heart of the Galactic Council's military leadership had been ripped out. The once unstoppable war machine had faltered, and without their leader, the remaining forces of the Galactic Council had no direction. They began to retreat, their once proud ships fleeing into the depths of space. Earth had fought back, and in a stunning turn of events, humanity had emerged victorious. The battle was over, but the cost had been high. The ground beneath Bonner's boots still trembled from the aftershocks of the epic conflict, and the air was thick with the scent of smoke and ozone. He stood, his chest rising and falling with each breath, surrounded by the remains of the battlefield. The stars above Earth's atmosphere were clearer than ever before, but Bonner knew that the victory they had earned came at a terrible price. So many had fallen, his soldiers, his comrades, the innocent civilians who had been caught in the crossfire. The child whose death had fueled his every move. The faces of the fallen were etched into his memory, and the weight of their sacrifices bore heavily on his heart. Humanity's victory was not just one of survival, it was a statement. A declaration to the galaxy that Earth was no longer to be underestimated. The Galactic Council had thought of humanity as nothing more than an insignificant species on a backwater planet, but they had learned a hard lesson. They had learned what it meant to face humanity's wrath. The AI-controlled forces of the Council, once thought to be invincible, had been shattered. Their cold, calculating technology, which had terrorized countless civilizations, was no longer a threat. With the death of their supreme commander and the collapse of their fleet, their hold on the galaxy had crumbled. The reign of terror they had imposed on countless worlds had come to an end. The galaxy would never forget the power of humanity, and neither would the Galactic Council. Bonner, standing on the surface of Earth, looked up at the sky. The battle was over, but his mind was heavy with the cost of the victory. His eyes traced the stars above, each one a silent witness to the horrors they had faced. The planet was scarred, and the sky was no longer the peaceful expanse it had once been. But in the midst of the destruction, Bonner felt a sense of resolve settle in his chest. They had fought for this moment, and they had won. As Bonner gazed at the sky, his thoughts turned to the fallen. The child, who had been taken too soon, was gone, but her family would finally have peace. The sacrifice of the soldiers, who had fought with unwavering bravery, would not be forgotten. The loss of Lieutenant Harris, his closest ally, had left a hole in Bonner's heart, but he knew that Harris's death had not been in vain. They had stopped the Galactic Council. They had protected Earth, and now, they could begin to rebuild. The soldiers who had fought by Bonner's side, the men and women who had given their lives to this cause, would live on in memory. Their bravery, their courage, their determination to stand against impossible odds had made this victory possible. And Bonner, though deeply wounded by their loss, would carry their memory with him always. He had promised them that their sacrifices would not be in vain, and he intended to keep that promise. Bonner closed his eyes for a moment, allowing himself a brief moment of reflection. The war had changed him. It had tested his limits, his strength, and his resolve. But through it all, he had never wavered. He had led his people through the darkest days, and now, standing in the aftermath of the war, he knew that humanity had proven its strength. They were no longer just survivors, they were warriors. They had fought back against an empire that had sought to destroy them, and they had won. But more importantly, they had sent a message to the galaxy: humanity would never be conquered, never be crushed. As Bonner's gaze lingered on the sky, the camera zoomed in on his face. His expression was somber, but there was a fire in his eyes, a fire that would never die. The scars of war were deep, but they would heal. And with every passing day, the memory of this victory would burn brighter, a reminder to the galaxy that humanity would protect its own, no matter the cost. He spoke softly, but his words carried the weight of a promise. "We'll protect our own, always." The camera lingered on his face for a moment longer, capturing the silent resolve in his eyes. There were no more words needed. The battle was over, and the victory was theirs. The Galactic Council had been brought to its knees, and humanity had proven that it was not to be underestimated. The future was uncertain, but Bonner knew one thing for sure: humanity would rise from the ashes of war, stronger than ever. The final scene faded to black, but the message was clear: Earth was no longer a weak, defenseless planet. Humanity had earned its place in the galaxy, and no one would ever dare threaten them again. They had fought for their survival, and in doing so, they had secured their future. The camera zoomed out, showing the destruction of the battlefield, but also the first rays of a new dawn. The sun rose over Earth, symbolizing hope and renewal. The war was over, but the journey had just begun. Humanity had emerged victorious, and nothing could stand in their way. As the credits began to roll, Bonner's promise echoed in the hearts of those who had fought with him. "We'll protect our own, always."